Firstly, I would like to acknowledge WT Australia has been a long time supporter of DECNet, and once again, they've graciously hosted this event. Thanks to Gavin, thanks to the WT Defence team. Victoria is about to see more than $1.5 billion of defence infrastructure investment. And most of the firms in this room will miss it. And that's not because the work isn't there, but because most firms don't position with enough time. So today, I'm not going to show you another defence pipeline slide deck. You've probably seen the one from November. If you haven't already, jump on the Defence website. It's available to download. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you three things. Where the real gravity in Victoria sits, which projects are actually moving in the next 12 to 14 months, and what firms that win this work are doing before the tenders land. Because defence work is usually won in the 90 days before the RFT is actually released. Before I get started though, I'd just like to address one of the biggest misunderstandings that the defence infrastructure market makes, the pipeline slide. Defence's capital facilities pipeline is not a commitment, it's a planning tool. Those priorities shift, the scope changes, and budgets get reshaped. And occasionally projects will disappear altogether. So if your revenue forecasts are assuming that an unapproved project is equal to imminent work, then you're building your business on sand. The pipeline is useful though, but only if you understand what it really represents. So if we look at the latest figures from the November briefing, Victoria sits roughly at $900 million worth of approved capital and $700 million of unapproved investment. Now that's almost a $400 million increase from mid last year when the briefing happened in July. And if we then add the additional $300 million that was approved in December, it means not only is the opportunity in Victoria growing, but also the certainty around expenditure. What matters for the industry, though, isn't just the headline numbers, it's where this approved investment is actually concentrated. So there's 4 centres of gravity that dominate the Victorian defence infrastructure market. You've got the Riverina, which carries the bulk of approved value now. That's Albury-Wodonga. That was last year's big opportunity, and it's entering into delivery phase now. Then you've got investments in Greater Melbourne and Northern Central Victoria, and they're yet to be approved. This investment is far less certain. In fact, November's briefing saw several projects get pushed to the right. So Simpson Barracks, Puckapunyal, investment that was previously forecast has been pushed by 4 years back into the future. But there's also a chance that this number could grow significantly. And in any case, unless you're a designer, you'll be lucky to get any work in those regions this year. What I'll be doing is covering those opportunities later on in this presentation. Gippsland is the first one I want to talk about because this just got approved and is due out to tender shortly. So now is the perfect time to be positioning for this work. So let's take a closer look at that Gippsland investment. And when I say Gippsland, RAF-based East Sale. This base is going through a significant transformation in the next couple of years. It's becoming the centre of Australia's future air mission training capability. Defence has announced approval of more than $300 million of investment in December. So plans are being finalised now and delivery is set to commence in 2026. Air Force will introduce new training technologies and simulation capability to go with it. So this means the base itself has to evolve to support this new training environment. So East Sale is going to become a key aviation training hub. The most immediate construction opportunity linked to that transformation is a project known as ESTA 5428 Phase 3. These are facilities to support the air mission training system. So the budget sits somewhere between $80 and $100 million, and procurement is going to be via a two-stage head contractor contract. An ITR is expected around the middle of this year, with the request for tender likely to follow shortly thereafter. So this is probably the clearest near-term opportunity in the Victorian defence pipeline. But the key point is this: if you wait for this ITR to hit the market before you start your positioning, then it's going to be too late. Now, projects like this always look simple on the pipeline slide, but the reality is usually much more complicated. East Sale is an operational airbase. Construction must occur around flying operations. Security constraints are tighter than most commercial environments. And the facilities have to integrate with these complex simulation equipment that's being supplied by others. So this is not a straightforward building job. It's cutting edge capability infrastructure, which means the delivery risk is going to be much higher than the headline scope probably suggests. Okay, now let's talk about weapons manufacturing. So the Point Wilson Mulwala corridor sits at the centre of Australia's munitions manufacturing capability. This region is directly tied to the guided weapons and explosive ordnance enterprise, which means that the infrastructure here is in support of our sovereign weapons manufacturing capability, which is a top priority for defence, second only to AUKUS. This is a very different environment from your typical defence estate works. It involves explosive ordnance storage, it involves manufacturing facilities, and it involves testing infrastructure and highly regulated safety environments. In other words, this is industrial defence infrastructure. So the major project in this corridor is the redevelopment of the Mulwala Benalla facilities that straddle the border with New South Wales. The budget range is quite wide, at between $200 million and $900 million. So that range reflects the fact that the final scope is yet to be refined and finalised. But we do know that the works will involve upgrades to the engineering services, new manufacturing facilities, and additional explosive ordnance storage. So the project's going to be delivered through a managing contractor model via a shortlist from the major construction panel. And that shortlist consists of the likes of Acciona, Built, CPB, Icon, and Seymour White. And the current expectation is that this tender process will begin around the middle of this year. So this is a significant project, but it's also a very technically demanding project. Now, the other project that has a lot of people excited is the Australian Weapons Manufacturing Complex. So this is estimated to be worth between $600 and $800 million. And the scope will include missile manufacturing facilities, storage, and supporting infrastructure. And it's going to be somewhere along that corridor. Now, this project is about more than just buildings. It's about Australia rebuilding its sovereign weapons manufacturing capability that has been in decline for over 3 decades. So for a long time, we've assumed that global supply chains would always be there when we need them. But the war in Ukraine has changed that assumption. Donald Trump has changed that assumption. And most recently, this week's conflict in Iran has reinforced the importance of controlling our own manufacture. How many lives have been saved this week in Saudi Arabia by their air missile defense systems? You've all seen the footage online of interceptor missiles. What happens when those interceptor missile stocks run out? Domestic manufacture is what keeps you in the fight. And what we're seeing now is through the Guided Weapons Explosive Ordnance Program is the start of that sovereign industrial rebuild. And it's projects like this that are going to provide the infrastructure that's going to make that rebuild possible. So procurement is similar to Benalla Mulwala. You've got a short list through the major construction panel. In this case, the entities are CPB contractors, Lang O'Rourke, Lend-Lease, and Multiplex. So really the A team, if you like, of that panel. The RFT is scheduled for Q1 2026, although as of this morning, there is no sign of that tender yet, so there's every chance that it could be delayed. Another program worth noting is the National ICT Mainworks program. This is a nationwide $400 to $450 million program, and the work involves secure ICT infrastructure as well as facilities to support Defence's digital network environment. This will be delivered across more than 60 defence sites nationally, and the procurement pathway will again be via that major construction panel. And while it's not a purely Victorian project, it will draw on that same pool of engineers and trades that the other projects are relying upon. So this means that it affects capability right across the market. Now, Osborne. It's time to stop pretending that this is just a South Australian project. Osborne is a $30 billion industrial machine to enable Pillar 2 of AUKUS, which is Defence's #1 priority. And the South Australian construction industry is just not built for it. Area 1, $5 billion. That's where the steel is pressed, cut and rolled by machines that are the size of houses. You then got Area 2, which is $8 billion. That's where there's blasting, coating, insulating. That's where things start to get complex. And then there's Area 3, which is more than $15 billion. That's the nuclear consolidation. This is going to be the most secure industrial precinct in Australia and one of the most advanced manufacturing facilities in the world. It's going to be nuclear secure. So you've got different licenses, different tolerances, different accountability. If your governance framework still looks like a commercial mid-tier builder from 2015, then you're not going anywhere near Area 3. So this is not just a local South Australian project, it's a nationwide effort, which means there are opportunities for Victorian businesses. But let me be blunt, Osborne will create winners, but it will also expose the pretenders. It's just isn't about whether you can pour concrete or install services. It's about whether you can operate inside a nuclear regulated and clearance controlled century scale industrial ecosystem. So if you haven't already started upgrading your security clearances, your governance and your quality systems, your industrial partnerships and your workforce skills, then you're just not positioning yourselves for AUKUS. Instead, you're sitting on the sidelines watching it happen. Now, for some of you, those opportunities that we've spoken about are going to be out of your reach, but everyone has to start somewhere. And the good news is that there is an entry point that's designed to nurture talent and keep these bases up to standard, and that is Estate Works. So these are typically projects between $1 and $10 million. This includes refurbishments, utilities upgrades, range maintenance. These don't attract headlines, but they do provide a training ground, for a proving ground for defence delivery. So procurement activity is expected to pick up throughout the middle of the year now that the new project managers have started to settle in. On the screen, you'll see a few examples of what you can expect to land on AusTender in the next 6 months. So firms that consistently win estate works projects are the ones that build the credibility. And that credibility is the key that opens the door to larger projects later on. Estate works, I want to be clear, is really where relationships matter the most. The program managers, the regional defence staff, and your PDS contractors, these networks are what shapes how these projects are packaged up and how they're delivered. So if your business model only focuses on the large capital works, then you're really missing an important part of this defence market, because the firms that build the track record through the estate works are often the ones that become the trusted partners for the larger programs down the track. All right, let's get this straight. Indigenous participation is not optional. It's not a paragraph in your capability statement. It's a mandatory part of defence procurement. Indigenous procurement policy is embedded now in the evaluation frameworks. So there's set-asides exist. Participation is assessed as in terms of value for money. So that means that you can lose a tender before your pricing schedule is even opened. All right. That's the part that I think people underestimate about Indigenous procurement. So this isn't just about optics, it's eligibility, whether it be medium works or estate works or major capital works or even design subcontracts. IPP limited packages are becoming more and more common. And if you think that you can just add an Indigenous partner 2 weeks before the tender closes and still remain credible, then you're mistaken. These paper partnerships fail quickly, and it's the authenticity that shows up during that evaluation period. It shows up in your risk allocation, shows up in your org charts, and it shows up in how that work is actually distributed. So evaluators can see the difference, and if your Indigenous strategy is reactive, then you will become exposed. So this is not about charity, it's about compliance. And the firms that treat IPP strategically rather than cosmetically are the ones that are going to succeed and win more tenders than they lose. All right, the next 90 days before the tender, that's what determines the outcome. And most firms get this wrong. They'll go off chasing everything that lands. They'll wait for the RFP and assume that their capability speaks for itself. It doesn't. First thing you need to do is choose your anchor. Choose 1 or 2 priority programs to go after, not 10. And if you can't explain in a few words what your priorities are when you go to the conferences or you get in front of a client, then you're drifting. Next thing, fix your constraints. Security posture, your clearances, your personal security clearances, your capacity and your experience. Address those gaps before the ITR lands. It's the eligibility that kills more of these bids than anything else. So if you're not eligible, it doesn't matter how much enthusiasm you bring to the table, it's not going to cut it. And lastly, build real relationships. The shortlisted consortia are forming now for some of these big projects. The PMCAs and the CFIs, they're testing the market. They're mapping the delivery risk as we speak. So now is the time to be getting out amongst it and positioning yourself for those wins. So if you wait for those RFT to land, it's already lost. You've got 90 days and that's your window. Victoria is not short of defence investment. It's short of firms that are prepared for what's coming. Over the next 10 years, we're going to see billions of dollars moving through this state. And the question isn't whether there will be work. The question is whether you will be ready when it arrives. My vision for DECNet is to be more than just a news feed. It's to be a network of like-minded individuals and a meeting place to share knowledge and ideas, and to push our sovereign defence infrastructure capability forward. Now, I'm just one person, but if you look around you, what you'll see, and for those of you online, browse through the list of attendees, and you'll see that there is far more knowledge in this room than just one person. So whatever challenge you're facing right now, whatever questions you have, I guarantee there is someone in this room who will have the answer. So before you go, please reach out to at least one person, introduce yourself, connect on LinkedIn, and let's tackle these challenges together. And with that, I'll open the floor to questions.
Could you elaborate on the Estate Works program and contractors that are already listed by Defence or deliver that program?
Yeah, really good question. The Estate Works program has just transitioned to a new contract under the Base Services Transformation. We now have 3 project management contractors. They call them PDS, Project Delivery Service Contractors. There was 2 for the past 10 years. It's been JLL and Oricon. And now we've transitioned to a new model. There's now 3 on that panel. So Oricon has remained. You've also got Bureau Veritas, formerly known as APP, and also Mott MacDonald. Now, each of those 3 PDS providers will deliver projects slightly differently. It'll be a mix of in-house and subcontracted delivery or design services. That's the professional services part of it. So the planning phase is slightly accelerated from the major projects because obviously the scale and the risk profile is different. And then in the delivery phase, it is a contract direct to defence. So PDS provider runs the procurement process and signs up a contractor. Now that contractor, that can be, most common is a medium works construct only model. It can also be a D&C model. Sometimes they're minor works projects. But the PDS provider becomes the contract administrator, but you're invoicing direct to defence in that case. So those projects are typically procured via AusTender. There's a growing subset that is procured via limited tender, so not open tender via AusTender, but via limited tender. And that's because they use the Indigenous procurement policy to limit the tenderers. That has a couple of advantages. One, it meets the federal government's social procurement goals, but the other advantage is that it gets the work done sooner. It fast tracks the procurement. Does that answer your questions?
Hi, Darian.
Hello.
It's Victoria here from Blue Sphere. Great preso as always. Thank you. Do you know if those procurements will continue through the life of that contract to go via AusTender, or will any of those providers, do they intend to establish panels for particular professional services?
So for professional services specifically, they won't be procured via AusTender. They are a mix of in-house design and subcontracted through, I guess you could call them panels.
Yeah, so, okay.
Mott MacDonald, for example, they ran an expression of interest process late last year. They did a big market survey and they've progressively been signing umbrella agreements with parties to provide services that they don't deliver in-house.
Yeah.
And Bureau Veritas brought with them as part of their tender a group of sub-consultants that they offered as part of their service.
So they're all slightly different.
What we do know is that those first 2 tranches are going to be allocated, and from then they're looking at introducing a competitive tendering model between the 3 panelists on the PDS panel. Okay, I haven't quite agreed on how that process is going to happen, so I understand the first couple of tranches, and a tranche is a package of projects that is presented to the PDS providers. The first 2 tranches will be allocated, so divvied up between the 3 roughly evenly, I'd assume. I've been told that Service Delivery Division, who oversees the Estate Works program, will be commencing their road shows later this year. That's something they did back at the start. We've finished about 3 or 4 years ago, but they run a series of briefings in every capital city. And I also understand that they'll start releasing the pipeline forecast again towards the middle of this year. So I think the last time they released a pipeline was mid last year, but I think that expired in December. Another place to look for PDS opportunities is on the planned procurements on the section of the AusTender website. So that's another good resource, albeit it's a little bit cryptic sometimes. Any other questions from the room? All right, well, look, really appreciate your time coming out today. And this has been recorded, so I'll be publishing this to the website. Those of you who've DECNet members will be able to access those. Yeah, please stick around and come and introduce yourself. And for those of you online, enjoy the rest of your day.